kind of as the plan B was unfolding, his quick desire to connect with other, to connect with his peers, and suddenly, not a solitary journey. I think, I'm of the older end of the young adult spectrum where, the Friends generation, right? That was the whole purpose behind that show, right? Is that we get our, our sense of truth and sort of check out reality with our friends. I think that still remains, so the question, how does spirituality and Charis retreats rise from its experience? The peer-led model, the idea that young people are hearing not from some authority, not from some book, but from the real life experience of their peers. That's what they trust.
I want to jump ahead to the present and just say a little bit about what some people are saying about young adults today, and sort of ask some questions about how do we respond to that. So how do young adults today see life and religion? And I think it's something like this.
Hey Dad, did you pick me at a cell phone?
Cell walls are thicker than plasma membranes and were originally discovered by Robert Hooke in a sample of cork.
Okay, so I guess that means you didn't find me a phone?
Thousands of telephone poles are destroyed each year by woodpeckers. Woodpeckers also nest in the cavities of trees, fence posts, and...
Which celebrity mom has another one on the way? What?
Soccer mom.
That mom's jeans who wear jeans to match their teens' jeans.
It's not just a system, it's a decision engine.
Wow.
Search over.
Oh, gee.
Okay, so I had a couple more of those, but I don't want to. I think we're kind of a little tight in time. So I think that to me sort of connects with what this sociologist from Princeton is saying, Robert Withnow. He wrote a book called After the Baby Boomers. I forget the subtitle, but it's basically about how young adults, what they tell us about religion today, their experience. And he says the single word that describes young adults' approach to religion and spirituality, indeed life today, is tinkering. And then he goes back to Claude Levi-Strauss, who had a similar term he called bricolage. Basically this idea that we join together a bunch of disparate things, and that sort of becomes our worldview. And I think that's increasingly becoming the case. We know it, it's becoming the case with us too. And it's what the young adults that we're dealing with, especially the millennials, it's kind of what they grew up with. So that our outlook on life and the way we see the world is in a lot of ways kind of like an internet surfing, going from one thing to another, and seeing things in that way. The problem is when we start seeing them, we only get little pieces of things, and we don't have the opportunity to really sort of reflect or even sort of hold on to things, because our brains can only hold so many things at once. The highest estimate is like 7 things we can hold in our short-term memory at once. Some people think it's even lower than that. It's more like 3 or 4. So we're going from one thing to another. A lot of things are getting left behind, and they're not making their way back into our long-term memory, because that takes time. I was reading this book this week called The Shallows: What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. It's a fascinating book, and it really. I'm reading it, I'm thinking, I need to get off Facebook. I need to get off And that's one of the big questions that we're confronted with right now today. This is the world we live in. There's no sort of getting around it. But, to what extent do we sort of take what's good in that and use that to our advantage? To what extent do we have to challenge some of those things? We got to discern what we can work with and what we can't. And I think this is one of the big challenges for us today, is trying to figure that out.
We were at the NCCL conference, and there was this gentleman in the community, and they were talking about all this technology, and he said, it's all grand, but they found out in their company, and he said there were only 54 people in the company. They found out that morale was in the toilet, because everybody was on the screen and everybody's trying to chase this. So the boss came out and said, on Friday, there will be no computers. On Friday, there will be no computers. There will be no cell phones. You must walk across the hall with the paper in the hand. You must see who you are working with. And all of a sudden, the morale changed because they knew who the person across the street was, It wasn't a blank screen, and they couldn't yell at each other.
And at the beginning, that's one advantage we already have at the beginning of our Charis retreats. Young people are coming, and they have to deal with a real human person standing in front of them. And I think we're starting to lose that. There was an article in the New York Times recently about how young people are losing the art of conversation. There was a quote in there from a 16-year-old boy said, "Yeah, I'd like to learn how to have a conversation one day, but right now I'm too busy."
Busy typing. With my thumb.
Busy texting.
So that's the world we're living in, and that's kind of the way things are happening. And what now says, again, with that emerging adult model too, more people are coming of age at 40 than ever before. So this is all happening as young adulthood seems to be, being pushed forward. So what we see is positive progress. I mean, this is another issue too, is that in our society we tend to see all technological progress as good, as having sort of no moral weight in a sense. Well, I mean, I think we have to start questioning that. In my book Already There, I sort of questioned some of that about Facebook and about blogging and stuff like that, how it gives us the illusion of community but not real community. And I said, I feel like I'm saying rock music is evil. Because that was the thing when I was a kid. The question was, is rock music evil? Now is it the internet evil? Well, yes and no. I mean, we have to sort of discern kind of what we need. So I think we need to provide young people with like a cannonball experience that Ignatius has. Experience to step back, reflect, connect, and something I've been saying about retreats for years, because I've been doing youth and young adult retreats for like 30 years now. When I first started doing them, we did these retreats where we kept them busy all the time. The day of those retreats is over, and whenever I see anybody doing them, I'm like, no, you can't do that. Because really what we need to do is less. We need to give young people time to step back and reflect. There's enough busyness in their lives already. So that's a huge thing. And that's one of the gifts of Ignatian spirituality. Because it's so focused on this time of reflection, it's so focused on silence and having quiet time. And that's been, from the beginning, one of the important emphases of Charis ministries and Charis retreats, is that young people come on the retreats, have the time to go off by themselves, in silence, reflect on what's being talked about and what they hear in the talks and things like that. So that's so crucial and as part of what we're doing, coming right out of Ignatian spirituality. Wait, we at
5 to
5 to 5? Okay. Yeah, I do want to let some people get to Mass if they want. So, just to kind of wrap things up, I think we use that term finding God in all things, but not in all things at once. Finding God in all things is supposed to be like in sort of some time spent in contemplation on sort of one specific thing. Each prayer period and exercise is contemplation on one thing, one passage in Scripture, one event from Jesus' life. It's not we're not trying to reflect on the whole of Jesus' life all at once. So that kind of sense of just reflecting on the one thing. Chance to unplug, I think we just need to emphasize, I think when people are, when I was doing retreats at the beginning, we take people's watches away. Now we need to ask them to shut their cell phones off, shut their computers off, whatever it is that they need to do to just step back. And I find myself running into that same temptation when I'm on a retreat. I still, I find myself still checking email and things like that. And challenging myself to not do that.
Okay, I've got a question. I'm curious what you would say about this. As I was listening to you earlier, I was trying to distill out what for Ignatius were the big game changers. Referencing your question about what we should be doing in our retreat ministry. And I wrote down two things. One is what you're talking about here in terms of space. The cannonball served up months of it for him. But then the second, and I haven't heard you ever deal with this much until this last comment you made about Jesus, which is he had the two books, Life of Christ and the Saints, which filled the silence. And so it seems to me that we can open up silence, but the way that we're programmed and shaped is to rummage around and look for something else to fill the silence. You know what I mean? And so what I'm struggling with here is the Jesus aspect, and let me just even tag a little bit more on a little bit of concern as a person who tries to keep up with research and is aware of what Christian Smith is saying about moralistic therapeutic deism, is this. I love the notion of God in all things. I sometimes wonder if Ignatius would say, you're focusing way too much on that and way too little on Jesus.
Right.
We are the followers of Jesus. We're the society of Jesus.
Now, side by side, Ignatian spirituality, I would say, is the finding God in all things, but also the personal encounter with Jesus Christ. And I was with a group, I did a mass for a group of young adults a couple weeks ago. Angela was there. And in my homily, I said, was this Feast of St. Peter's and Paul. I said, what Peter and Paul are talking about in these readings today is a personal encounter with Jesus Christ and how that transformed their lives, and that's what we should be about. And several people came up to me after the Mass and said, why doesn't nobody ever tell us that?
Well, I think all of our silence, they're always given tools to help. Like, I love how you say nurturing their spiritual memory. And I think we're giving, within the silence, they're taking a moment to reflect on how are the scriptures speaking to them, or what, we give them questions, that kind of thing. So, because I agree with you, Sean, it's not just about, stillness is important, but and I think our retreats do that, give them something to help foster that encounter with Christ, or help, whatever, fostered by the right word, nurture it, that kind of thing.